Hi, I'm Marcy Sullivan, host of From First Kiss to Wedded Bliss. Joining me today is Lee Baucom. He is the creator of Save the Marriage System. It's used around the world for over 2 decades. He's the author of 4 books related to relationship issues and marriage recovery. And as a relationship coach, Lee works with people around the world to save and restore their marriages. And even when one partner has given up, his method has proved useful for people working on their own to turn marriages around to committed relationships and into loving, thriving, connected relationships. He shares that approach in his system, his writings, and the Save the Marriage podcast. He has been podcasting since 2013. He's married and has 2 adult children and 2 active dogs. Welcome, Lee. Thanks for joining me today.
Marcy, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I want to start by asking you, how did you get started in doing what you're doing with marriages?
So I was actually trained as a therapist. That was my beginning point. I was trained as a marriage and family therapist, particularly. That was the focus I chose, even though I did a lot of work with individuals. So I kind of cross camps a good bit. But my wish for that, which I think is kind of behind your question, is because of what I saw in my extended family. My parents are still happily married in their 80s. My grandparents were happily married until their deaths. But I watched others in my family, particularly my uncle and 2 aunts, really struggle to figure out how to be happily married. And I saw the impact it had. I have cousins. I don't know where they are. They broke away from the family. I watched the pain from my grandparents. I watched the pain even in my parents with their siblings going through it. Obviously, my cousins, and then even watched the effect on my cousins' kids. So that's 4 generations of impact.
Mhm.
And so when I started move towards therapy, I didn't really have a clear idea. As I got into my training, I kind of kept finding myself moving towards helping people in relationships. And so that I came through it as I say I'm a recovering therapist now because I no longer do that work. I do coaching, mainly because I realized that the statistics on marriage therapy were not very good. And I was watching the effect in front of me. And so I decided I needed to find something that was more worthwhile for people coming in that would actually help them move their marriage along. So I made a shift to coaching. Gosh, that was back. Well, I started coach training right at the end of my PhD. In fact, I was in the middle of writing my dissertation. I turned to my wife and I said, "This is how I do my work anyway." And she said, "After all of this, what are you going to do?" And so I was known as a therapist in my practice, but I did a coaching approach to the therapy until one day I went, it's time for me to pull away and say I'm a coach. So that's kind of the long story.
Excellent. I want to bounce off of something you just said, that the statistics with counseling is not very good. Why do you think that is?
There's not a lot of research that's more recent than what I looked at a while back. But so here is the statistics. About 50% of people who go to marriage therapy still end up divorced, which pretty much mimics close to what the average is anyway in general population. Only 10 to 15%, depending on the study, reported that there was any significant change, and they tracked that, for a couple of years out. So, I mean, that's kind of like if you go to a doctor and you say, "I've got this issue," and they're like, "Hey, you need this treatment." I will tell you 50% die anyway.
Mm.
You got to, yeah, but only 10 to 15% get better. You want to sign up for that. And yet that's what people do. And the reason is as I've watched it, is it's not that the underlying theories are bad. It's how therapy is often carried out. And there are a couple of problems. One is many times it ends up being a communication issue kind of presentation, right? The therapist defaults to let me help you with your communication. Communication is not the heart of the problem.
Mm.
And so all you're doing is creating, as I used to say all the time, I'm teaching people better ways of arguing. And that's not changing the fact that they're still in these conflicts and don't know why they're in the conflict. So that's a problem. Second is there are a lot of people who are doing marriage therapy who are not actually trained as marriage therapists. They just one day went, "Oh, that's the market I'm going to see," and they were individual therapists. And individual therapy and marital therapy are very different in who the client is.
Mm.
And if you don't train that way, you don't recognize that. So that's another issue. The other one is therapy, at least for a long time, and with rare exception, is taught that the therapist is supposed to be neutral. And I don't believe that that's particularly helpful, particularly around marriage and family therapy. In individual therapy, you need to kind of hold that place where the person can have their own space of how they process things and be somewhat neutral. But I don't really believe, A, that therapists are truly neutral. I don't think that's a human capacity.
Mhm.
So you're holding yourself out of that. But second, I think that people, when they come to marriage therapy, actually need somebody who is saying, I'm for your relationship. Let's
Mhm.
see what can happen. And if
Mhm.
that's not possible, let's see how we can still move forward. The One of the things I always note is that for the vast majority of people getting married, or I'm sorry, getting divorced, there are kids involved.
Mhm.
And so it's not like they can end that relationship anyway.
Right.
There's going to be a relationship. It may change how it is, but you still have to resolve those issues that are causing the problem because you're going to be co-parenting. So that's another piece. So again, I think about it in terms of like if you go to a doctor, if I go to the doctor and my arm is hanging at a weird angle, and the doctor looks at it and says, "Well, your arm's broken there. What you want to do about that? I mean, you want to fix it or just leave it?" That's neutral, right? They were going to say, let's get that fixed for you. Let's make you functional. And I think the same is about marriage. Let's see if we can make this functional. Can you always do that? No, just like a doctor can't always fix what's wrong, a therapist can't always fix what's wrong. In fact, they can never. They can help guide the couple, but they can't guide a couple to a better marriage if their whole stance is, well, we'll do whatever you want. They have to have a stance that's on the side of marriage. So that's a whole lot of why I think the statistics are bad, but
Mhm.
that's where we end up.
I think that's great. And I've also heard people say that when they go to a counselor, they're each griping about one another for an hour, and then they don't feel any better about each other after hearing, they're airing their dirty laundry in front of somebody else. So yeah, that might be an issue too, just complaining about each other for an hour.
Well, in some ways, I think subconsciously people are looking for the judge as they're kind of the attorneys arguing their case. And if they can win over the therapist, and honestly, because I also was part of a graduate program in teaching people therapy skills, there are plenty of times when I would watch the therapist side with one against the other, truly side, and almost always it was siding with the one who was ready to leave the relationship. I mean, I would just watch it time and again in video after video, presentation after presentation. I'm like, did you notice that you slipped to the person who wanted out? And they weren't aware of that. They just thought that there was nothing that could be done if one was opposed. And that's why I've worked so hard to find ways to help people who find themselves as the one who is still wanting to hold on to that commitment.
That's good. That's really good. Well, let's get into, I think one of the first books I saw that caught my attention was How to Save Your Marriage in Three Simple Steps. Can you tell me a little bit about that? First of all, what are the three steps?
Okay, and let's just say I said simple, not easy.
Yes, okay.
I try to be direct about things, but I also recognize that there is effort necessary. And so I've had people come back and say, "You said it was going to be easy." I never have said it's going to be easy. Simple though, let's give it direct. So there are three areas that I recommend people um, go into. And let me step back for a moment before we get to that because I need to put in a why this is a problem. So I have a theory that the core of most marriage problems, there are some that are outside of this, basically because maybe somebody is toxic in their own selves, that they have something going on that they haven't dealt with and they're dragging that into the relationship. So let's set that out because they're not the outliers, but they're not the majority. Most of them come through this other method. And that is that, you fall madly in love with this person. You'll spend all your time with them. You have all this energy you're putting into the relationship. Then you go through the wedding, you say, I do. You maybe go have a honeymoon if you're fortunate. And at the end of that, you come back to life.
Mhm.
And suddenly, subconsciously, you go, okay, we've got that settled. We got this. So now we got to turn our attention. And turn our attention is what I talk about as the pause button marriage. They
Mhm.
think that they will pause the button and come back to their relationship at some future point. They have the feeling that it's kind of like in suspended animation. I always think of that, all the science fiction movies where they put them in little capsules and ship them off, and then they reawaken as if nothing has changed. The problem
Mhm.
is you can't do that with relationships. And so whether it's time to be parents to the kids, and so now we're parents, not the couple primarily, or maybe it's I've got to get to this certain point in my career so that we're all safe and secure, or maybe it's we got to deal with the parents and their health issues, or maybe it's I want to accomplish these sports things or travel things or hobby things or friend things or whatever it is, but we'll come back to us down the road. And when you do that, you cut off the connection.
Mhm.
And the connection is the lifeblood of the relationship. So I just named the first C. There are three C's. The first C of this is connection.
Mhm.
So when you're trying to get back to that, you have to reconnect. You have to connect with your spouse. So that is the first piece of that. And the reason that is so important is because you've hit the pause button. So you're unpausing your marriage. You're coming back to that. And one person can start that. They have to be careful not to overwhelm the relationship, though, as you've gone from this distant, disconnected relationship, and suddenly one person wants to, you know, full force in, and the other person's like, wait, I don't, what's going on here? And they flee. And we can talk about that pattern too in a minute. The second is to change yourself. And
Mhm.
here is one of the things I've seen so many times. I remember it so clear in my mind. This person came in and said, "My wife keeps telling me I've changed. I need you to tell her I haven't changed." And I said, "If you haven't changed, you've missed your opportunity because we all need to change and grow." So it's not me saying there is something wrong with a person and therefore they need to change as much as me saying we all grow stagnant.
Mhm.
And that stagnation research shows happens late in our 20s into our 30s where we lock in on so many pieces of life. And that's where we see people struggling with kind of what happens around them. As things evolve around them, they want to be where they've been. They've locked it in. And so being willing to grow, step into that, to grow and to change and become more of the person you need to be, that's the second C, C, change. The
Okay.
third C is create. And so I have another core tenet to what I believe about marriage is that marriage is creating a we. We're in this together. We are a team.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that you've lost your identity, which is what a lot of people say to me. So you want me to just give up myself? No, you need to bring your best self to that. But like on a team,
Mhm.
if I just go, you just play your game, I'll play my game, you're not going to win.
Mhm.
But if I say, how can I be my best in this game? How can you be your best in this game? So creating that new path is becoming a we. And what most people fail to see is how predominant that is in a successful marriage.
Mhm.
We around money. This is our resource.
Mhm.
How you do the bookkeeping is whatever, but the actuality is that there are resources flowing into a house and out of a house, and that's it. I mean, and so if you say, well, that's my money I'm spending over here, it's still removing a resource from our household.
Mhm.
With parenting, how do we decide how to parent? Not do we have to be carbon copies of each other, but can we support each other in how we approach this? Because we're going to have different views. And research shows that it doesn't matter if there are differences in how people parent, but whether they are consistent with their parent within parent style they choose, can they stick with that? And even if it's a difference, can they understand that and see the strengths they bring from that? We could go through lots of other topics, but it's basically that. Can we create a we?
Mhm.
Those are the three. So connect, change, create. Those are the three pieces.
All right, I'm seeing here. I love that idea of change yourself because, as you were saying, a lot of people go into a counseling office saying, trying to get the other person to change. If they did this, then our marriage would be great. But I love that idea, change yourself, because that goes along also with the biblical principle of getting that log out of your own eye first,
Mhm.
and then you can deal with the other. And also the whole idea of creating that team. My husband and I, we go back to that time and time again. We're on the same team. We're on the same team. And that's really creating that oneness that God desires in our marriage, too. I think that's wonderful. Now, does your Save the Marriage system kind of go along with those three C's that you use in the How to Save Your Marriage in Three Simple Steps? Does it
Yeah,
kind of
so the
expound on that?
my assumption is that all of my work has a core basis to it, right? And so it's different pieces of that. And so the system is something I built. And so that went online and first in 1999. It's been iteration after iteration. So, all the way to the last century. That was when that hit and so we kept creating and weaving more into that system as it went because we would find people needed something else. At one point, I decided I need to say, okay, these are the simple pieces of that, just to kind of simplify that and help people understand that. So that's why the book. Most of the things I do are along the way, I go, oh, okay, I haven't really gone into that enough. We need to cover that more deeply. So every spinoff is some piece of the same central thing that you've got to connect. The connection is the lifeblood of a relationship. B, to do that, you have to also be able to do some growing and see that all of that is in the goal of becoming a team, working at that we. So when people say, "Oh, that's the lose yourself," I'm like, "Do you remember the change part where it's about becoming your best self?"
Mhm.
That's one person. So two best selves working together is how you build that we.
Mhm.
And the heart of that, the lifeblood of that is the connection that flows between you.
Mhm. Yes, connection is important. And I think that's part of that intentionality in a relationship. Instead of the pause button, like you were saying, to keep investing, keep doing things for your relationship. So important. I was thinking about your idea that one person can save the marriage or make a difference. What exceptions would you say? Are there any to that rule?
Oh, sure. There
Okay.
are, so the exceptions to it are tend to focus around a couple of things. One is if you've ended up in a truly toxic kind of environment, where it's abusive, where somebody is manipulative, something like that, where they're likely bringing in their own woundedness to the relationship from a childhood that really does need to be healed before they can do anything relationally. That doesn't mean that there's no hope for the relationship, but uh, there is a safety factor to that. I've got to make sure that somebody is safe before somebody can engage in any way that's of depth. So there is that. The other is that there are times. So let me use a very rough analogy. For a number of years, I did jujitsu, and jujitsu ends in one of two things generally. Either somebody is, we call it choking out, but is really closing off the carotid arteries to the point that the person either realizes they're about to pass out or they pass out.
Mm.
That's and the other is that a limb gets locked and it's twisted in some way it's not supposed to. So our limbs only go, generally one direction. So push it to an extreme the other way, and somebody's going to go, I'm out. So those are the two things. So let's go with that. The uh, the way that we would close off those carotid arteries. A number of ways of doing it. It's never trying to cut off the air supply if somebody's doing it right. It's closing off that.
Mm.
And the problem is in humans, that is a potentially fatal issue, right? If you cut off your carotid arteries, after a while, your brain doesn't have the oxygen and it can't revive itself. Generally, in jujitsu, you hold somebody until they go, "Oh, wait, I'm about to pass out." So that's a crisis point in a relationship. That's kind of the equivalent, the crisis point. Sometimes it sneaks up on people, and they actually pass out. You let
Mm.
go and they revive. And so let's just kind of use that as an analogy. If somebody were to hold on to that too long, too cut off that lifeblood too long, there's nothing left. You've you've killed that person, or it's that's what leads to that. And so the same in a relationship. It is possible to be disconnected and cutting off the lifeblood of connection so long
Mm.
that truly there is no part of that that can be revived.
Mm.
So many times it's not that it couldn't be possible as much as somebody has completely lost the hope there
Mm.
and replaced it with hope somewhere else.
Mhm.
I've often said that I would rather deal with a hopeless spouse than a spouse who's decided to be hopeful about something outside of the marriage.
Mm. Mhm.
At least we all want hope.
Yes.
And so part of what we're trying to do is figure out how to regain the hope in the relationship. So Charles Snyder, back in the uh, 80s into the 90s, talked about the hope formula. And he said there are three parts to hope to make it a functional hope. So this is, for a long time, really up until Snyder's research, we just kind of felt like hope was something you had or you didn't have.
Mhm.
And I spent a lot of time in my early career as a chaplain in hospitals, and we were always talking about hope, and people would lose hope. And we were kind of like this ethereal, well, you have it or not. Well, Charles Snyder said there are three pieces to hope. The first piece is that you know where you want to get to. There's
Mhm.
a destination you have.
Mhm.
So for this, it would be to have a loving, secure, supportive relationship. That's what I try to help. Not, I hope that we don't get divorced, but I hope that we have this loving, connected relationship. So that's where do I want to go?
Mhm.
The second thing is you've got to know how to get there. And generally, that is a lot of what my program tries to do is help people understand what do you do. And in fact, I just released an app that helps people unpause their marriage, which gives them the how do you do that. And the last thing is you've got to have a willingness to get there, a willingness to go in that direction.
Mm.
So whenever somebody's feeling hopeless, I'm asking, have they lost where they want to go? Have they lost or don't know how to get there? Or is it a lack of willingness to do it?
Mm.
And so generally when I have somebody come to me, they know where they want to get to, at least generally speaking. They want to save their marriage. I can add in some of the details of what that might look like. They also, the third piece, are willing to do what it takes.
Mhm.
And what we got to do is fill in the how to do it.
Right.
Lots of times with a spouse, they don't know where they want to head anymore. They
Mm.
don't know how to get there, and they're not sure if they're willing. But those are pieces we can begin to work towards if there's something that gives them a better goal. If a spouse is able to say, let's say reconnect some, and they go, oh, the need I have to reconnect is getting met now. Now I want more of that. They're beginning to gain a sense of what that might look like, of where to get to.
Mhm.
And then as that happens, even if they're not sure how to do it, they might gain some sense of, I want to get there. I want to move in that direction because I like where this is feeling. And then the other pieces of how do you get there can be filled in down the road. That's why it takes that one to start it, as opposed to somebody who says, well, I don't think my marriage can do it, but I've got this person over here I think might be able to I see a future with them. They've become hopeful about that.
Mhm.
And that's moved them. And so that diversion can make it very hard to turn them back towards, not impossible, but hard. That's why I wrote the book on recovering from the affair. It is possible, but you've got to recognize that that is a symptom of how disconnected the relationship has gotten.
Right. Oh, wow. That's so many good things. I could probably bring you back on another time. Uh, you were talking about when the other person isn't quite sure, and that's the subject of another one of your books. I think it's Beyond the Three Barriers, Why Your Spouse Can't See a Way Forward and What You Can Do to Help. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What can you
Yeah,
do to
so
help? Yeah.
so the things that those three barriers are to be helpless, to be hopeless, and that's the kind of the two big pieces of that, helpless and hopeless, and they don't know what to do. And so part of what I encourage the spouse to do is hold on to their hope, but not to be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but to work on rebuilding the connection. A lot of times people are like, I want to grab you by the hand and pull you along, and that creates another dynamic. So there is this dynamic that we've talked about in research of the pursuer distancer kind of thing. I call it being a chaser or a spacer. And so the chaser is the one who goes, "Ooh, I want this." And
Mm-hmm.
so they charge in trying to help, trying to share articles, trying to share books, trying to do all of those things, but they're not connecting. They're just trying to get the other person to start acting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get to that point, they're chasing, and the other person becomes the spacer. And the faster you chase, the faster they space. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to find what I call being the pacer. You have to switch gears a little bit and be the pacer of how can I invite connection? How can I clarify where I want to move? How can I move in ways that are less intrusive to where the other person is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really good. Is it possible that you can work on yourself and when you change, it changes the dynamic of the relationship? Have you
Not
seen
only
that?
not only possible, but that's the nature of a relationship.
Okay.
So if you think about it in a dance, and you've got this couple who's learned this dance together, if one person changes the dance steps that they're dancing, the other person's got to find a way of recalculating that. Now, sometimes, it's a little bumpy. You step on each other's toes for a while, but you have to find a new rhythm to it. Or think of it as a math equation, right? If you change one side of a math equation, you've got to change the other side. I
Mm-hmm.
think about it, and one of the images I use is like it's in a boat. If one person is leaning way, way out in a boat, the other person is going to lean way, way out in the boat to find a counterbalance that makes sense. But if one person can start the process of coming back to a more balanced state, the other person can do that too. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to find the increments of getting to the place where you're in a more balanced state. And it doesn't mean that you have to say to the spouse, you have to change.
Right.
If you're changing, it changes the dynamic. If you're no longer interacting the way you've interacted, it changes how that interaction now goes. And so it kind of naturally creates a place for change. So if I've been defensive or attacking and suddenly I'm finding a better way of being self-regulated, of managing my mood, then even though for a while the spouse may still step into those old steps, as long as you don't get pulled back in, then the spouse has to kind of change their way of being also just by the nature of that.
Mm-hmm. I think it takes a little bit of process of learning to trust again on the other person's how, and is this really for real? How long is
Mhm.
this going to last?
Right.
That kind of thing to get them to feel in a safe place again.
Well, and for most couples who are in a crisis, it's not like they haven't tried to do something. They might have
Mm-hmm.
tried date night, or they might have tried, various things that were too much for the relationship to handle. And so they would try it, and because it wasn't at the right place or with the right understanding, it never lasted. And so, sure, you would be doubtful that this is different. So you have to have a different foundation in yourself to recognize why those past things weren't working and how this could be different, and to be willing to stick with it. One of the things I often talk to people about is not proclaiming to your spouse how you're going to change,
Mm-hmm.
but actually changing. Because if you proclaim to somebody how you're going to change, they're looking, they're watching to see if you're doing
Yes.
that, and they're
Right.
looking for places where you don't do it. And you're not going to be 100%. None of us are. All of us have bad days and bad moments and bad 15 minutes. But if
Right.
those become evidence that, see, you haven't really changed, that's a hard battle to win, as opposed to, just working on that, being that different person, recreating the habits of relationship that have been going on.
Wow. Well, we are almost out of time. So I want to give you the opportunity to share with the audience how they can connect with you and get help from you.
Yeah, so an easy place to do it, savethemarriage.com/podcast. So you listen to this on a podcast. It's a savethemarriage.com/podcast. That will get you on a page that has three different pieces to it. One is the Save the Marriage system. If you're in true crisis, like active crisis, that is a good place to start. If you're going I don't even know if our marriage can do anything. I have an assessment, it's my GPS assessment, and people can take that and see what has potential in their relationship for change. And then I also have my Unpause app. You can go to unpauseyourmarriage.com if you're like, yep, that's us. We're really stuck and just need to start. Unpauseyourmarriage.com. You can also do that program by yourself, but that is one that you can also do with a spouse. So savethemarriage.com/podcast will get you links to those three pieces that are kind of the different parts of where you might find yourself.
Well, the podcast is great. I'm following
Thanks.
it now. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
I always like to have more resources that I can direct people to. As we close, I'd like to ask you on a personal level, what is something you do intentionally to strengthen your own marriage?
So we do set aside time to hang out together. I look for, and this is one of the things that I encourage people to look for how you are being loving towards each other, because sometimes we miss that. That's the whole point of love languages, of learning how to do that, but to look for that and to pay attention to the bids, such a John Gottman term of how those little bids for attention, like it's a beautiful sunset or, something like that is a way of turning towards each other. We're pretty intentional, though, about making sure that we are supportive of each other, realize that we're on the same team, and actually spend time together on a regular basis. We've been married now since 1988 and still happily married. So it's
Yeah,
working.
it is possible.
Absolutely.
I'm a believer.